My dog is on my bed, so I have to like keep my door open to make sure that he's like okay, because he's if he starts barking, it's just the worst. So
Should we let you know, Indigo, if we see any movement back there?
yeah, just if you see like a tiny no nose dog pop out, he's
Hmm.
gonna jump for his like for his life. So
That's good.
he's a
Yeah,
risky
so
old man.
I think I've been on a Zoom with you before and seen your doggy.
Yes.
What is their name?
Buddha. His name's
Buddha.
Buddha.
Wow.
Yeah. So in a couple weeks he'll turn 10. He'll turn 10 years old. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, he's my little guy.
Oh,
I brought him actually to the print studio when my aunt came to visit last weekend.
mhm.
And so I, because he's a Pekingese and he's a runt, so he's like really small. And so I just carried him in, and everybody who was there, like Alyssa and Nick, were just like freaking out because there's like this tiny little dog who loves to be held. And Alyssa was like, if you want to bring him anytime as a support dog, I'm like, that's his dream. He loves being held by humans. He hates other dogs. He just wants to be on someone's lap and cuddle. So he's a very, very sweet guy.
I feel bad him being in the other room now.
I know. Well, if he's on my lap, he'll be like here, and it's like distracting. One day I'll make sure he's on my lap for another
Yeah.
call.
Okay, that sounds good. Well,
Yeah.
there's only a few of us gathered today, so I think, I was just saying before I clicked record that maybe we can, we were going to continue to reflect on the COVID report, and I think
Hmm.
we can do that amid other things,
Sure.
but also, to think a little bit about what we're doing in the Unlearning Hour, really. Jarrah, Indigo, and I had a meeting yesterday to record an episode of the radio show. And in that meeting, we talked a bit about this, about, what this space is for and who is it for and how to think through it. And, I was saying to her that I always kind of just think it matters to respond in the moment to who turns up, and that's kind of significant. So I think in that spirit, I think we should just, before we even get into some kind of holding forth or big debate about what we're doing here, like, you know what do both of you and what do I want from what we're doing like right now. I just came from a really boring conference on assessment, and I knew I wanted to go in person, but the rain was so bad, so I was joining on Zoom, and I knew that if I joined on Zoom, I wouldn't pay enough attention I wouldn't
Yeah.
follow, and correctly, I didn't follow. I know there was a discussion about SEIs, and also evaluation of an assessment of the general education. But if I was pressed to do a report on what I'd listened to and watched, I would not know. So I knew that I would have to leave to come to our Unlearning Hour. So that was a nice escape route for me. So that's the reason I'm here today. But Jarrett and Indigo, what are you doing here?
Yeah, I can go next. So, since I've been here, for however many learning hours or unlearning hours I've been here for, I've enjoyed coming back to kind of have conversations that are around topics that I previously haven't been able to have a wide group of people to have conversations with, like very literally like indigeneity and arts mashed into one. It's usually been like very separated, and I've been the one voice who's been talking about that perspective. So that's kind of why like I've come back, but also the intersection of what the arts means. And so like you have like the researchy art historical part, you have the education part, you have the practice portion of it, like the fine art portion. And so it's this has been like a weekly kind of deep dive into like if I want to keep going in this area and trajectory. So it's kind of been like exploratory, but also because I've been very, which I've said before, I'm used to like Midwest and like even just Southwest indigenous stuff, that knowing more global, South American, Central American has been something that I've been wanting to go into, but haven't had any reference in how to even begin. So this has been a really good start into that, but I think it also has brought up some concern on my end of like how deep dive do I want to go before I get overwhelmed with all that needs to be done for Indigenous communities. And so there's been a internal question, which I've liked when we've had these kind of conversations of, do I get really involved in a community that's not my own, or do I like have relations but really stick to like what is taking place like with my own peoples, whether it's Turtle Island, Ohio, or even like my own tribes. So um that's been a conversation that I've been having internally, that I think the more we have these things, I'll be able to suss out for like the next year or two what I'm kind of focusing on. Jarrett?
So I would say, I guess going back to when I first had Dr. Wibblesman as a professor, that was in the spring of 2020 for one of her classes on Indigenous studies in Latin America. And it just opened my eyes to a lot of different perspectives that I'd never heard before. It was just a new way of thinking that was really stimulating to me. And I feel like there was so much momentum built up there. And then the pandemic hit. And and I went into the next year of study and didn't have as much exposure to a lot of those issues, though it was something that I kept looking at in certain ways. But I feel like, especially recently, I've just realized I work like on research a lot, but the research has to do, it's like policy based. So it's always focused, it's always like prioritizing certain forms of knowledge, which can be interesting or can be like good to know about. But I feel like I just wanted to diversify. Like, even though we may talk about like the impacts of colonialism on indigenous communities in like where I work, a lot of times it's not, sort of like you were talking about, Indigo, it's not dealing with like arts, it's not dealing with these like other forms of knowledge. So I wanted to kind of come back to this to ground myself a little bit more, to expose myself to some of those aspects that I don't usually get to see in my day to day. And just because it's always great to talk to other people who are interested in these subjects and kind of just get more exposure to different resources and whatnot, and just a space for the beautiful things that come out of these spaces. So
I mean, this is, I mean, I'd love to, I mean, have this opportunity to learn more about the work you're doing, Jarrett. I was thinking when Indigo was speaking that, how, are these sessions actually really um, kind of information sharing? Like, are they really kind of giving us, it doesn't seem, they seem kind of more methodologically kind of pertinent. And like last year during the pandemic, we had these workshops with the Pachasana Institute in Ecuador. And, it was, we would kind of take some of the models that their methodologies and bring them into our discussions and see how they would fit in with the class. And but yeah, but it's like I feel like just hearing, Jarrett, you just talking about, this is the work that you're doing, but that you kind of want to like think about it in relation to the arts, because you're not kind of getting that from the policy side of things. Maybe if you share a little more, then maybe even Indigo and I might be like, oh, there's this, or there's this, or like, maybe something may come from a little more information, and then we can kind of work from that, because it's not like we have I mean, I just really feel like we spend so much of these sessions kind of building up to something, or kind of getting close to a conversation, and always by the end we're like, damn it, we don't have time, we have to shut it down. And so yeah, let's maybe, as with Indigo's permission, like it'd be really nice to just start with Jarrett, just and you can yeah, there's permission, you can share things with us in the chat, or like documents or things you want us to look at with you, or you probably didn't come here today thinking you'd be doing this, but maybe it would be really nice just to just to hear more.
sure, absolutely. Thank you for opening it up for me. I think that, I mean, there are two different think tanks that I do work at. And I think in general, like the think tanks have, obviously they go through their different waves and whatnot. I feel like right now there's definitely more attention being paid to Indigenous communities throughout Latin America within that kind of sphere. I feel like for a while it was always like Argentina and the IMF and these like always like economic things. But so some of the examples of some of the things that either I've worked on or people that I'm working with are working on, I discussed earlier that, or at one of the earlier sessions, about trying to do a piece on Warao migration from Venezuela into Brazil. That obviously didn't go through, but it's still something that I study kind of in my free time and try to incorporate where I can. Michelle actually shared some resources because she's teaching a class on, I think it's musical migrations. So sort of, and I think she incorporates some uh, work about the Warao people in there. But other than that, so that's sort of like on the migration side. I mean, there's also a lot of the questions I feel like that I hear being brought up, even in the migration like think tank work that relates to indigeneity, is usually just about capacity with indigenous languages at the border. Like if they have like translators available, especially with the linguistic diversity within Central America in particular. I know that that's been a challenge, but other than that, it's not talked about too extensively. And even just like differential considerations for what is, hello, Peter, for what is like displacing indigenous people, I feel like it's not quite there. With regard to some of the other work I do at the other one, it's focused on Brazil, so that there, I would say, is a lot more of a focus on indigenous communities there, specifically within the Amazon and the advocacy that they do. Like one of the big popular ones is the APIB. The translation would be like the articulation of indigenous peoples of Brazil, or I think that's how the translation would end up. So there's definitely acknowledgement of the activism that goes on there, some of the issues that relate to deforestation, mining, etc. But again, it's very much like the impact that state action has on these communities, and kind of ends there. It doesn't necessarily always open up into like, here's what this community, like here's the understanding of the way of life of this community. So yeah, sorry, that was a lot of rambling. I can look up more specific like pieces that have been done or anything and send those in the chat as I find them.
I think that would be really good, Jarrett. And I'm just welcome, Peter. We were a small group today, so we were opening up a kind of discussion of what we're doing here, and also, you know, using it as an opportunity to learn a bit more about Jarrett's work and interests. And you know, we might get to the COVID-19 report, and you know, and maybe we get there through the work that you're talking about, Jarrett, really. And just so you know that, I mean, I don't know if you've been in the sessions where we've talked about the Cassandra Press Reader, you know, in terms of it as a commission, because the story of that stemmed from my encounter with the work of Alina Bayana. And do keep it. Yeah, you do the stuff in the chat. It's important that you're focused on that. Actually, maybe let's just pause a little bit, and I mean, maybe let Jarrett do this so he can, and then we can go. Let's see the chat, and maybe we'll just click on things and look. So let's just pause, and I'll come back to. There's just a connection between deforestation and damming in the Amazon that is to one of the artists in to Alina Bayana's work. So I just thought that was the thing that came to my mind while you were speaking. But yeah, I think let's spend a bit of time looking at what you're sending us. I think that's important. So and what I might do actually, Jarrett, is I might just share the screen so we can all look at it together. So I'll go to the first one and then to the second. So this was the first link, the link that Jarrett shared. And Jarrett, were you sharing this for the specific event or just the Wilson Center programs?
It was, yeah, it was for the specific event. I'm trying to find just specific either events or publications that kind of reference what I'm talking about. So that's an event that's happening next week.
Yeah. I was just seeing who was part of the event. So is this the council that you mentioned before? Or no, that's different.
No, yeah, this event, it's basically looking to bring together people with different perspectives of indigeneity. So like the Cinea do Vale, she's from the like northernmost state of Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
It's bringing kind of the Amazon.
So this is interesting though, because this shows, so this, their perspective might be the one that you're kind of focused on, but because there's an Inuit and other tribal member being part of it, then you're seeing a kind of global indigenous discussion. That's great. Okay, I'll go back to the chat. Ignore the second link. Okay. So is this the right one then? Oops, sorry. This is another one from the Wilson Center. Yeah.
Yep. So this one is just going through an activist within Brazil, and specifically, I think like one of the big timely issues that this one brings up is what's called the Marco Temporal, which is this legislation being debated in Brazil right now that essentially would say that indigenous peoples only have legitimate claims to their lands if they were occupying them as of 1988, which was the promulgation of the new constitution entering into the redemocratization period.
Mm. I'm just going to go down to that footnote just to see. Oh, it's the Portuguese. Okay.
I can translate really quick if you want. It says the concept of the marco temporal, which basically means like time reference or time frame. I don't even know how to translate that honestly. Creates an arbitrary end date for claims to land, affirming that indigenous peoples only have the legal right to claim their traditionally occupied lands that they were physically occupying as of October 5th, 1988. The most recent date in which the federal constitution was approved. The Marco Temporal was adopted for the first time by the Federal Supreme Court in 2009 over the borders of the Raposa Serra do Sul Indigenous Reservation in Roraima, which is the northernmost state in Brazil. More recently, in 2017, the former president Michel Temer approved a recommendation of the federal or the public ministry with this legal theory.
Thanks, Jared. Just so we had the translation there, but I think that was more fun to have Jarrett translate it at that moment. Okay, and then let me go to, yeah, again, we can save these in the chat. And then you had a third one that was here. There's a PDF. So let me share that.
So this one is from an advocacy organization. So it's a bit different because they obviously operate differently than a think tank. If you scroll down, I think it's like one of the last pages, like maybe 7 or 8. There's an article. Oh, there it is, on page 5, actually. It's about the activism of the APIB, which is one of the indigenous groups that operates throughout Brazil, but especially in the Amazon.
And this is your report?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I feel like with advocacy, you can be much more upfront about a lot of things. You can call a spade a spade. And there's, I think, just more room for different forms of knowledge, albeit pretty slim.
I'm really interested, Jarrett, with this work that you're doing. We have this report that we commissioned. It stems from an artistic project by Maria Teresa Alves. And this actually circles back to something that Indigo and I were talking the other day about, which is, maybe, there are certain skills and tools of, engaging with artistic practice that might not translate into actually kind of action and, actual advocacy. I last week was quite humbling for me because it made me realize how, when we read the document together and we had this discussion, which was a little awkward at the time, but about kind of poetic speech versus, just like get the message there. I think both Indigo and Michelle kind of emphasized this point. And, now that, we've had some discussion about this, and I'm yet to correspond again with Maria Teresa Alves on the translation and kind of next steps, but it does feel a little bit like I feel like we, and I'll say we because it's better. I don't think it's just me, because this is a community of the Cachuela Cuna, are kind of sitting on something, and it's like we're not enacting it. And so I put the recording of us speaking on Instagram and put it on my blog, but that doesn't seem really kind of to be doing too much. So aligning it with the Al Jazeera article was interesting, but it is that kind of question of how so an artist brings attention to an issue and a policy issue too, within a community, and then what happens when that is continued in the way that we did it, and are there ways in which we have different responsibilities to the artists that went in there and brought attention to it through being part of a biennial. So there just seems to be lots of question marks that come from this, and connecting it to the Bolsonaro regime and other kind of the general climate of racism and of attacks on the livelihood and lands of indigenous people in Brazil. It's another kind of piece of evidence, but it just seems like it needs to get into the right circulation. So yeah, I just given that you'll have this the policy, the advocacy approach, like where what do you think about the limitations of what we've been doing, and like how we can amplify Ray and Vera's report in a way that acknowledges there's an artistic framework, but then getting it kind of out there more?
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that would be definitely something that I think I would need to think on a little bit more. Like I was saying, I feel like something like that definitely really lends itself to the advocacy world. In terms of like think tanks, one of the things I was just going to send in the chat is that I feel like a lot of these types of initiatives get pushed in think tanks. And I mean, I'm speaking very generally and based on limited experience, but nonetheless, I feel like a lot of it gets pushed by interns. It's usually not connected to the revenue drawing aspects of the work that they do. And those internships are almost always unpaid. So that's a whole nother question of accessibility and whatnot. Yeah. But I feel like regardless, there are ways to incorporate it, especially like, I think it's just finding those little like niches. I think at the Brazil Institute in particular, there is a lot of desire to talk about these issues, especially as it relates to the pandemic, indigenous communities, Bolsonaro, all of that stuff. So I think that would be great. In fact, I'm allowed to do like interviews with people. I'm allowed to like write blog posts. I'm allowed to do infographics. So that could be really great. And also they like this is a smaller point, but they always have to like mine their own photography, artwork, whatever it may be, and usually from sources that allow for, for use of the image. So even something like that, I think, is really great for this field of like having some type of visual as well, like already there. Those are just kind of my first impressions, but it's definitely something I can sit on more.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. I mean, the related issue, and maybe Indigo, if I can bring you in here, is because the way in which the commission was kind of started in the first place was through the Potify Tatusi project, and having the newspapers there in the reading room. And then and now Indigo is a participating artist of that project and has the office hours in the reading room. Hey, Michelle.
Hi,
Um,
sorry I'm
and
late.
Hi there. And has the office hours in the reading room. And so, you know, and Indigo, you sit with this document, knowing that there's kind of some action on the new report and all this kind of thing, and you're participating in this. But not only in terms of the advocacy world that Jarrett is swimming in relation to this community, but also even our local context here in Columbus, that feeling of like needing to get it into the stream, as it were, is in that world too. And so I don't know if Indigo, you can reflect on some of the possibilities, or that having this newspaper where you are working, where you are contributing as an artist, could be maybe kind of activated as part of your own activation in the Podify Tatusi project.
Yeah, so I mean, it is very literally there, on the table when I have meetings with people, when I hold sessions with people, and I always, when I introduce it to someone who maybe doesn't know what it is or is questioning why it's there, I always kind of say this is a very cool, just a physical representation of me being in a print studio. It'd be different if I was just in like a community center or like a museum or gallery. Like I'm literally working out of a print studio where print is being made, where you can smell the paper, you can smell the ink. And so there's a very different relationship to people who um, engage with paper and then not maybe knowing, of course, the language that's printed on there, but still having it be in this, what they may know as a traditional print medium of reading information and gathering knowledge. So something that I've been trying to figure out is how to incorporate it in this space so that people understand that they can take it. There's still a bit of uncertainty of like what they can touch and what they can't touch. And so having to have that communication has been an ongoing thing that I think I'm still trying to figure out. Technically, by tomorrow, I'll have like my third office hour, hopefully with Michelle over there. So kind of figuring out what is the protocol for this space, and what, because the past 3 or 4 sessions I've had have all been like with grad students. So either they've been people who I'm, close with, their my soul family, right? Or there are people who um, are wanting to know what I'm doing because it's really ambiguous. And so I'm personally at the state where I'm finally solidifying what I'm doing for the next few years. And so with the paper itself, because I don't know that language, I'm kind of uninformed when it comes to the what's happening in like Southern America. It's kind of a weird circumstance, quite honestly. Like, there's books up there that I can really articulate, even if I haven't read the book, but I know the authors, I know the social political issues that are happening with those specific regions. But with this, it's like I need a lot more information to be able to, I think, truly advocate for it. And I wouldn't feel comfortable to advocate for it with what little I know now. And so that's um, I where like Rich and I were talking yesterday, trying to figure out ways in which this can be accessible physically because of the medium itself being so, like, a newspaper is really important, but also to other people who also need this information without it being a random Instagram post that people like and move on. So like that's, I think, a conversation of what are all of our different positions and people who kind of navigate this Unlearning Hour is like kind of what is our stewardship And I think that might be I would say an easier way to kind of say, okay, this is my positionality, this is what I can do, but I can't do any more than that until I say otherwise, kind of like a consent, rather than this is the issue, people may feel overwhelmed. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to freeze and not go anywhere, or someone knows a lot and they need help, but we don't know how to give them what they need quite yet. So that's kind of, yeah, so like stewardship, and just that's something that I also would love to, even like with Jarrett sharing all this beautiful information, which Jarrett sent me Instagram because I want to be BFFs. But like, what are you doing in your world, and like share it, and then that's like that 1 hour, right? Like we all like put the highlight on that person, and they're coming in and we can have a conversation, and like here's the theme, and then we all maybe come from little bits. To me, there's not enough time to like have this big abstract thought and then go into it. But if we have someone saying, this is what I'm working on, help, like you would like for like a writing group, then it's like, okay, we can come from where we're at to maybe support, and then do something after. So that's where it's, I like with the Cassandra Press and the newspaper, like I want to go more, but I'm kind of confused on what we're doing because things get changed depending on who's in the room. And so maybe that's where like a stewardship comes in, like you are the steward of you know Friday, October 29th, and this is what we're bringing, how we can support you. So to me, it makes more
Maybe.
person centric than maybe like scary issues. It makes me sad, you
Mhm.
know. So yeah,
So maybe I can weigh in on there because we're dealing with some of these questions, right, in our
yeah,
curators group for the Andean and Amazonian Indigenous art collection. Um, and one of the things that we're very mindful about not doing, right, is to claim some sort of position of authority or some position of, here I am to give you information, about these things, but a much more humble sort of approach that, um, yes, emphasizes our obligation to dig deeper and deeper into the information. Two, we have a team, so it's very interesting how some students are reading proliferously, and then other students are focused on other aspects of it, including just spending time with the items, right? So we have a team that comes in from different disciplinary sort of perspectives and different experiences. We're developing, well, first of all, where our objective is not to systematize anything and to say, okay, this is how we're going to do it, right? Our objective is to keep it wide open, right, as a research lab, right, where we experiment with different things, especially pedagogical, methods, especially research methods, right, to just try different things. And I think that initiative comes from our Pachaisana workshops last year, where they're adamant about saying, how can we advocate for change if we don't rehearse for change first, right? So the idea of rehearsing some of these possibilities is absolutely critical, and I think in line with what we learned, from those workshops last time. Keeping it open rather than feeling that we have to have like a policy statement or like a way that we do things, and definitely destructuring any position of authority in terms of communicating information and questioning. I think that Richard, you have sort of led us in this, questioning the issues about advocacy, right? That's a big leap, right? So maybe going back to the supplement, that we were talking about last time, and I don't know what I missed in the first half, but there were a couple of things that really struck me, right? One is the idea that comes up not only in this community but in many communities, which is hope. And I thought that was a very powerful piece, of the supplement, is this idea of hope. It made me think about Paul Carter has an article that is on mishearing and issues of appropriations, but like the amazing creativity that happens in spaces, where people either mishear each other or misunderstand, and yet something really positive comes from it, right? But the platform for that discussion has to do with a sequence, right? Where he says it's not about understanding, cultural understanding. It's not even about an attempt to understand or a desire to understand, right? It's about the desire to create the conditions for understanding. So it takes us like 3 steps back, right, from the actual advocacy piece or the actual understanding piece. And I think that that's really important for us to think about, right? Not just the desire for understanding even, but the desire for creating the conditions for understanding, you know? So I wanted to center that. And then maybe last thing, sorry, I'm kind of talking extendedly here, but the last thing that I wanted to mention is this statement, like from the initial piece that Richard read to us last time, right, of the introduction of the newspaper. Does racism hurt? Is it real, right? And the response, it is not normal, right? That comes up over and over again. This idea, it is not normal. And I think that that points us to 2 things, right? One is that by talking about racism, by talking about diversity and inclusion and all, you know, all of those things, but in the context of racism, to some extent we're normalizing it. To some extent we're like losing really like the intention or the power behind what that means. And this reminder of it's not normal really hit me, you know, like yeah, I just feel like it's calling attention, our attention to that. And the other thing is that when indigenous populations, subaltern, minority populations talk about racism, it's processing their experience, it's processing their trauma, you know, it's many things. When dominant societies talk about racism, the framework of what is happening there is very different. So I just wanted to point out, even if we're using the same language, even if we're talking about the same thing, it's 2 different processes and 2 different frameworks. So I'll leave it at that, but that was everything that was sort of coming up for me as we talked last time, and then as I thought about these things throughout the week.
I guess we started today with and so it was Indigo, Jarrett, and myself, and Peter joined a little bit later, and then you joined, Michelle, and we were kind of, and actually it's really interesting because we knew we would come to the report, and we wanted to, like, have some reflection on what happened last week in relation to the report. So Michelle, thanks for coming back to that. But we were also wondering how we're using this space, this hour, with each other, and something that we, rather than kind of debate that topic, we just thought we would give Jarrett the kind of the floor for a little bit to just talk more about his work and his advocacy work, and he shared some links, and it was very brief, and it's not, it's barely touching the surface of the work you're doing, Jarrett, but it got us to a place quite quickly that I think, Indigo was referring to too, like the idea that is such a short amount of time to share with each other. We have things we want to reflect on, and a kind of an agenda, as it were, or kind of an idea of continuing things, and I feel like I'm still processing the dynamic between these 2 commissions that we've done as Cachuela Cuna, and also what is Cachuela Cuna right now. I think that is, or maybe the best way to put it, what is Cachuela Cuna in this hour, in this space, and so I feel like I'm still kind of reeling from not knowing how. And this comes back to the first thing you said, Michelle, about kind of, it's not, it's an earlier phase of working out what we're doing. And that's with, the Cassandra Press reader on the one hand. And, I have to tell you all one thing, which is we're reading it in my seminar, and we get to the article in Portuguese. And so we have, students using Google Translate students whose first language isn't English, using mechanisms to try to read this. And we come across the article that's about mothers talking about the murder of their children, and it was very harrowing, because one of the students in the class was in tears with what she's a young mother, and is in tears in what she was reading. And suddenly I just felt, I've not prepared my students for this reader that goes from a convoluted theoretical text to immediate kind of confrontation with this. And I think that that's also part of our commission with Kay and Vera, which is the immediacy. So I guess I'm feeling quite unprepared and uncertain about how I want to amplify. I want to disseminate, to kind of share this, but I also feel like I don't know how firm the kind of platform is that I'm doing it from, and that is related to positionality, but also to many other things too. But so yeah, so I guess it was interesting. I guess I want to just reflect, Michelle, on this. So Jarrett was kind of we were going this other way today, and it was interesting to kind of just feel that way. Felt kind of there, and then now we're being brought back immediately to confront with what we did last week. Is it's complicated. It's kind of complicated with where we are, and I don't know. I also feel like the way we kind of set up the Unlearning Hour, when we had the Pachasana workshops, there was this rhythm where we would reflect on what we had done together. And I think now it's almost like, and I think I've said this before, this moment of, I got to send an email. And when I send that email, that will determine what we're doing. And that feels wrong, that I'm like somehow have that role. So I'm just very interested in what Indigo was saying about taking this time to steward. For example, I could take a time, we don't have to, the reading of Cassandra Press is one thing, but maybe I need to take time to steward what it means to read the Cassandra Press reader together. Jarrett, you had your hand up.
Sorry, this isn't necessarily super in line with that, but I just was thinking, I loved what you said, Michelle, about the creating desire to create conditions for understanding, like really stepping it all the way back. I was just reading an article last night that was talking about always like rewinding a little bit. And I think it goes a lot with what Indigo was talking about with this theme of advocacy that we keep talking about, and kind of avoiding just the like, okay, just post on social media, move on, like that type of very quick engagement, because even that, I mean, it can maybe create a slight understanding or a desire to help others understand, but it doesn't necessarily, like a lot of these spaces do, invite someone to have that desire to create those conditions, to like leave this space and try to like propagate that. So that was just kind of a random reflection, but I just thought that I really loved that. That was very like, I'm gonna sit on that for like a week now.
I'll send you the original article that mentions it after this. Yeah.
One just very practical thing, Indigo, with the newspaper, it is translated into English inside the newspaper. So there is that. This is the thing. It starts with the Guarani and ends with the Portuguese, but in the inside you have the English. But one page that's kind of nice to, we can even think about having it open, is the page with images of the community as well. And so there might be a way of, and actually that page has all three languages working together with the phrase, the struggle has been and always will be for survivance. And, this is a really interesting topic, which is the translation of survivance, Zeno's concept, into Guarani and into Portuguese as well. So there's some, and I mentioned to Maria Teresa Alves about having that as the kind of language phrase of the for the Potiphar Tusi. So I just, there is something about, and we talked about this as well, Indigo, like the closed book. The closed book can feel like, you don't even know if when you open that book it will be prose or poetry or image or something else. But when it's, even with the newspaper, you open it up and there's a color kind of supplement there that changes our relation to the kind of very quite austere cover, right? I mean, there's something that it's not inviting to jump into this text. So I was just thinking about that in relation to the Potiphar Tusi space, if like the opening might be helpful.
Maybe thinking about some of the issues that Pat was raising last week about translation, right? Again, there, that sometimes people feel daunted by a different language where they feel like they have to translate it, right? But if we broaden the concept of translation and bring in this aspect of desire for the conditions of understanding, I think that it gives us an opportunity to approach books or items or anything really, art, in a very different way. I often feel that when people approach translation immediately as like a barrier between languages, that they can't move forward. Like they'll just look at the Guarani text and say, I don't understand it, and then don't even open it, right? Like that type of thing. So I don't know what you think of this idea of like broadening, even when we're confronted with language. I love how Eric Johnson, for example, deals with medieval text, but he says that the object, like the actual book, the binding, the type of paper, all of that is like so important, to understanding what this item represents, that if you focus just on the writing, you're missing like 95% of the information, right? So I don't know if you have any thoughts about how we might broaden that sort of approach to language or to anything else,
Um, I think I think that's almost like an overarching question, even for like the reading room and just the project itself is like, which I think is going to take some time and maybe time to explore that with like other people who are coming into the space, and even, talking when they're available to the other artists who have contributed to this space, is like there is no material culture in there that is like indigenous, right? There's no like hide in there that has print on it. There is no mark making tools that are indigenous in any form. It's Western paper, Western tooling, Western, ink. So there's this in itself, which attracted me to the project, was like, okay, you can have indigenous narrative, story, just language on a Western, I don't know, form, right? Which is really cool because it makes it accessible in some ways to be easily distributed. But then that like translation block, like you're bringing it, Michelle, is like what still is happening with the text in the reading room. And so for some people who have come in, they've really enjoyed just the catalog from the galleries because they like seeing the pictures, but if people are interested in like poetry and spoken word, then they go immediately to the poetry books that are there. So it's been something that I think, going to take the time as more people come in to kind of get an idea of who is wanting to be engaged in this space, to get an idea of like how to confront language without having to worry about translation being something that is a block for people, because there's a lot of indigenous language all in the library of all different tribes that for some reason some people that I've talked to and had like a couple hours with, they've enjoyed just knowing the words but don't want to have a conversation with me because they're unsure like how to pronounce something, and they don't want to be ignorant. And so there's this kind of like like how I was last week, where I wasn't trying to pronounce something and I wanted to honor that, the words, because of the power of the word. So the very like literal context of having something that is like material culture of native that isn't the written word isn't really there right now. And so trying to bridge that between like you can still have indigenous stuff there without having a very literal like terracotta pot or a very literal like hide to make it be like indigenous stuff is present has been something that I am still trying to quite honestly sort through. And
One of the things that we've
yeah,
done in our collection is audio, right? Like
yeah,
untranslated, just so that people can hear
yeah,
Quechua language. So yeah, I think that that is a very powerful
sure.
way of presence and representation, potentially along the lines that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, that's where like I would love to I mean, like I've already expanded the project with like the office hours things, but I mean, because adding a web page to then have some of the audio quality be really helpful, you know, like having some of, like I told Richard, like Newpiming, I listen to the audiobook, I don't read the book because those are two separate experiences. So if there's a way to integrate kind of the audio of someone who has the tonality and the dialect and the accent to articulate those words, and then even the translation. So I think they'd be really cool, like even what we did last week, as someone who speaks that indigenous language, the person who has done the translation of the same thing in that language, and then the English, whoever you would choose for that, would kind of be a cool, just little thing to add upon the printed version of it. Because then you can hear the flow of what is happening. Then someone who, like, if I read that in English, you're not getting the flow of someone who said that in the original language, which needs, I believe, needs to be there. And then any other translations would be really cool, even if it's like in Mandarin or in other languages, because it is a human issue, but it's kind of like bringing focus onto what that specific community is asking for, but we're able to translate it and hear from other voices. So it's just another idea um, with language.
As a languages teacher, as a French teacher, one of the, and I'm not sure if this is along the lines you're thinking of, but if I attempt to say that to understand French culture, you need to understand the French language, no one will ever succeed in understanding the French culture. And if I can speak firsthand, not with respect to French, because that's what I do during the day. But, you know, if you spend time in a community, whether it be a Quechua community, whether it be a Peruvian community, a Spanish Peruvian community, you can go into that area and not know anything about it. And you cannot know the language. But if you immerse yourself in it or allow yourself to be immersed, it's not altogether a conscious thing that you do. You find yourself in the deep end of the pool, whether you like it or not. You learn to appreciate. So if people are coming to, and not only appreciate, but to be able to connect with that particular culture. And I'm not familiar with your library, and I'm not familiar with your newspaper, but the flaw in anyone's thinking that I can't associate because I don't speak Guarani or I don't speak Portuguese is, and I'm not talking about the four people here, but there's flawed thinking. And if you do nothing more than to say, just allow yourself to let it to wash over you, you will gather an appreciation and, more importantly, an empathy for what is being presented. I honestly am a big believer that if you spend too much time on the language itself, on the linguistics, you're going, and anyone is going to miss the bigger picture. A lot of words, and I'm sure this is the case with Guarani, I don't know Portuguese, I know some Spanish, but there are a lot of words that are not translatable anyway. You can't possibly translate them anyway. You know, if you tried to find words that are used in other languages and try to translate it into English, you're not going to find that direct translation. And that's where Google Translate is such a mess, because everybody will read Google Translate and go, oh, now I get it. No, you don't. No, you don't.
So Peter, this makes me think about children, right? And how children play and the language just does not get in their way, you know, of communication. When I took my son to the field multiple times when he was little, he would just get swept up by this group of kids, and they would just take him. And he would come back saying, like when he heard them saying "Yashamuni mamita," he would say that to me too. Like, "I'm coming, mom." Running, "I'm coming." So it was really amazing to see how children are able to just not let that phase them, and for them to be able to engage immediately in play and different activities, right? Along those lines. I think that
Yep.
there's something for us to remind ourselves about, and maybe
Well, they don't have the inhibitions.
Yeah. And they
They
have
don't have
other
the
ways of
inhibitions
approaching the
of
world, which
pride.
are not like linguistics based, not language based necessarily. So, yeah.
Exactly. And one of the, and I don't want to, I'm trying not to monopolize this, but one of the things that had been considered by Ministry of Education here in Ontario was to view French as an action, not a language, and to view sharing it as an action. So there is, and it's kind of funny to watch, there is a program of using your hands to express thoughts, and we let the words follow afterwards. So we don't say, "Je m'appelle Pierre." We would express ourselves by pointing to ourselves, so they get the idea. Oh, you're talking about yourself. It is remarkable. I went into it very skeptically, but after viewing it, particularly as you said, Michelle, with the younger children, it is incredible what they pick up between grades 1 and 3. And it's not because Canada's bilingual. It's got nothing to do with that at all. It's just the nature of children. And I'm the first to say I was skeptical of it at first, but the proof is in the pudding. It works. When my wife and I were in, and I don't want to monopolize things here, but when my wife and I were in Peru, we went down to Peru, and we were there for several months going through the adoption process. And neither of us spoke Spanish going in. My wife spoke Italian. And we got down there, and my wife would try to communicate. And after spending all this time thinking, we got to learn Spanish, we got to know Spanish, we found out that a good portion of Peru is Japanese. It was like, now there is no common ground. So once we kind of relaxed about that, it was amazing how well we were able to immerse ourselves in the, Peruvian climate. Yeah.
So here I am being the timekeeper, but we've reached our hour, and I think we can continue this next week. And I guess thinking of next week, is there anything that that we want to, again, we don't have the time to discuss it, but is there a starting point that we want? I mean, do we want to start where we end here with Peter visiting Peru as part of the adoption process? Or do we want to start with, continue with Jarrett's work, or, again, if we commit to being here next week, what do we want our conversation to be about? Understanding that others may come. And that's the process that we have. So
I'm here to learn, so I'd rather hear more about Jarrett, what's been going on with your work. I really would. I mean, I always have this problem of arriving 15 minutes late because I'm in the middle of a class, at the end of a class, but I would like to hear more about what you've done. That's my interest anyway.
Yeah. Or we could volley the ball to someone else. I'm also interested in it.
Or we could do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked well, I think, today, kind of seeing who came and where the interest fell. So maybe we could try that again.
Yeah. Yeah, but let's try that maybe as a model. You're right, Jarrett. Let's kind of, when we arrive next time, we will spend time with one of us, just gets a few minutes to really kind of discuss the work they're in at the moment. And we will tie it back to broader themes like the reader, like the commissions, like the collection, like Potofoto Tusi, all of these elements. But I think yeah, let's, if we can start with that, and maybe we can begin next session with that as a working premise that we will do that. Michelle?
And maybe just another thought is, you know, November 2nd is a big date for celebrating with our ancestors throughout Latin America. The Abya Yala student group has done an extraordinary job of expanding this from like the typical concept of like the Mexican traditions, you know, with the Day of the Dead and the altars, where we have many, many different traditions throughout Latin America. But I've heard Indigo speaking about the ancestors, you know, in powerful ways. We've seen the reference to the ancestors in Kay and Vita's writing. And we're at this particular moment in time, you know, where it is kind of one of the seasons, not the only one, you know, there's more frequency of thinking about ancestors. So whatever conversation we're having, it would be interesting to sort of bring them in as part of the community as well, right? Part of the discussion. Even in discussions of things like advocacy and things like this, you know, we think that the ancestors are dead, but in indigenous communities, they are not. They're very much part of the community, right? So how does that affect the way that we go about our cultural understandings, but also our advocacy work, right? So just a thought.
Yeah, that sounds good, Michelle. I like it. In the class, we were just watching this very brief film by Cyrus Marcus Ware, who's a Black trans artist in Toronto, who is part of the Toronto Biennial, who has this video project called Ancestors, Do You Read Us? And it's a dispatch from the future to us, or well, to many of the Black community in Toronto, to kind of say, you know, thank you for sustaining us. You know, so it's a message. So it's like Indigenous futures, you know, the kind of speculative futures, these kinds of issues, but also thinking about ancestry and the ancestors as well. So we can, yeah, we're getting started on next week, so no, let's wait until then. But yeah, some kind of mix of that. We've got a theme, we've got a kind of methodology. Let's see how it goes next week, and I'll try in the emails I send out to broader communities to kind of you know, express that this might be our focus. Okay. But you know, in the spirit of what Michelle was saying, you know, preparing to, you know, to get that desire and that enthusiasm might not be we might be at an earlier phase of that than maybe I feel like that. Sometimes I feel we're at an earlier phase of our development in this world, or in this thinking, than sometimes, and we forget that, and we need to kind of just remember that it takes time and it takes this kind of discussion. But thank you everyone for your presence and your voices and your bodies and your minds and your time and everything to be with us together. It just means a lot to spend this time together. So see you next week.